Hello, and welcome to Speed Reading with Comprehension. I'm Miriam El-Kazmi, and this is Susan.
Yep, I'm Susan Bodner-Darren.
And we're here today to talk about speed reading with comprehension. That's essentially the goal of the module, but we haven't touched it until now. And so there's a book called How to Read by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Duren. And one of the points of this book is that reading is like a pyramid, and that there are different levels of reading, and that they all kind of are cumulative. So you build on top of one level, builds on top of the other. So the most basic level would be considered elementary reading, and that's really where it's what do the words say and what do they mean? How do they sound like? Inspectional reading is a little bit different. This is when you're reading the title page, the abstract, skimming an article. And the whole point here is that you're not really trying to grasp every little detail. It's almost like a first run through of the piece. Analytical reading is where you ask many organized questions of the article that you're trying to read. As in topical reading is when you then take that article and compare it to other articles in the field. You're finding out how does it compare to other books or other articles. You're looking at it in a relational way, and that's the highest level of reading. And so this is a very useful tool. We tried to adapt some of these principles to a more digital age for you to use. And we're also going to talk to you a little bit about our experiences. Also, one last point, and it's remedial training in college is not unusual since the 1960s. A lot of people have been relearning how to read, and this is quite important because you shouldn't feel any shame, or even if you do, just know that it's very common for people to have to relearn how to read, and that it affects different groups of people differently, but everybody's really struggling with the same thing. So whether it's not your first language, or it doesn't feel like a language that you recognize, or you think that you have some personal characteristics that would stop you from understanding it. I really believe that these tools will help you. So first, let's talk about speed of reading. The first thing that you need to do is don't feel like you have to read the whole article at the same pace. Read at different speeds and think about, is this something you're reading because you want to read it? Like if you're reading a poem, you're going to like really savor every word and understand it. But if you need to read it, and there's a lot in scientific articles that we just need to read for a deadline, for school, for publishing a paper, then that's a different motivation. And we need to recognize that maybe we need to read these articles faster in a more structured way. And so one of the things that we can do is use our finger or a pen and horizontally use it to go down a page. And what we're doing is we're glancing at only one line at a time, just basically trying to get a gist of what the line is saying. And with a computer, you can scroll slowly down the page. Skimming is the first attempt to read an article, and you should not try to understand the whole study on first attempt. Instead, you're going to take notes, and we're going to talk to you about how to take notes. Do you have anything to add?
No, I would just say note taking is just like so critical, and we all have our own styles. I tend to still print things out and take my notes in the margins. I color code my pens, and that has its own kind of symbol to me. But you can use, the comments on a PDF and things like that. And so it's just when you do that skimming, when you take the notes, it does kind of direct you to where you want to kind of come back, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's, she made some perfect comments. You made some perfect comments about how to take notes. You can underline, highlight, if you want to use this PDF, highlight on the PDF. We tend to like having paper, but you need to underline major points on margins, and you can do this with a PDF as well. Use, think about either including numbers for the sequence of the article. 1, 2, 3. These are 3 points the author's making. Circle keywords or phrases. Highlight them, comments, whatever you want to do on a computer. Write questions on the top or the bottom of the page in comments. And that you're doing that with the knowledge, exactly kind of what Susan just said, it'll help you go back and further attempts to know what to look for. And finally, look for transition words. So let's talk about transition words. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go to transition?
No, I just think note taking, I think, is one of the kind of most critical things. And I think always, for me, when I write my notes, sometimes those are my jumping off points for when I have to take somebody else's research or literature and summarize it in my own words, because I put my notes are in my words.
Mhm.
And so it allows me to kind of distance myself from the original text, again, to make sure I'm not just doing a copy and a paste.
You're making it your own.
That is correct.
All right, transition words.
Yeah. So transition words are really critical, I think, as like these little kind of signifiers when you're reading. And at its very basics, it basically says the author is kind of synthesizing and going deep into something and is ready to transition either to going deeper or to another kind of concept. Transition words also are super critical in your own writing, especially when you're starting to synthesize a lot of different articles, making sure that you kind of transition from thought A to thought B is very, very important. And so when you're reading an academic article, just be on the lookout because you know that this is where the author is going to go deeper. So a lot of times it's just to kind of point out similarities across studies or even concepts within the study or within the article. So when the author says things like in the same way, you know that they're going to expand on similarities. By contrast, those keywords that basically say there's going to be some comparison or some contrast. So the simple word is but, however, notwithstanding, but very often the author, especially if they're going to be talking about differential concepts, they will say in contrast or on the contrary, so-and-so found this. And that creates that tension for higher level readings. When an author is trying to kind of make a point that there are like lots of different elements, they may sequence. First of all, second, third, and of course, then finally. That's a key so that you know that author is kind of wrapping up that thought and kind of giving you the last in the sequence. Temporal considerations or time, especially when you're looking at historical trajectories of ideas in research, those are also really kind of critical, right? Recently, simultaneously, before, that gives you, the reader, an idea of how that author is synthesizing the information. And then, of course, when an author has a thought, write a thesis statement, and they want to make it explicit, they will use the for example. And so those give you these kind of really nice concrete elements that exemplify what you're reading. Other transitions words are used when an author really wants to emphasize a thought, right? Like indeed, in fact, of course, this is what we're looking at. So for emphasis, place, position, cause and effect, additional support or evidence are also different areas where we see transitions. In terms of place and position, again, has a little bit of a temporal kind of thing, below, beyond, before, cause and effect. Here you can look at words like accordingly or consequently, and then additional support or evidence. I think this is one that I always kind of really am on the lookout for, where it's kind of like again, right? There's an element of emphasis. Equally important, may talk a little bit about attention, but this additional support is where the author really wants you to kind of pay some careful attention to his expansion or her expansion or their expansion, or again, can talk a little bit about, maybe some competing hypotheses. And then finally, and I use the word finally to transition to the next slide, good writers or authors are going to kind of summarize the thesis and the proofs in the paragraph above by giving you this kind of conclusion summary sentence. And that's just a nice way when you're reading to kind of say, okay, this is the main thesis in that space.
I wanted to add some clarity with something we were talking about earlier, and it's that place and position is a very interesting one because you could say, you know, below there's going to be a table and these are the things that it's going to show. But then also you can say, let's think if you're talking about two neighborhoods that are near each other, you can say, you know, this is one affluent neighborhood and nearby there are other ones. But then in terms of it being a transition words, it could be like, beyond the ideas that we stated, there are further ideas maybe that need to be unpacked. So there's really quite a bit of nuance that I want you to pay attention to. And so sometimes these words will really serve as great transition words for you to keep track of. And other times they may be literally referring to a place
The
or
table below
Yeah.
or an adjacent neighborhood. Yeah,
Yep.
thank you for that clarification.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about different types of note taking. We talked earlier about the skeleton model, which, you know, is my way of talking about the structure of a research article. When you're taking notes, you already see the fleshed out article. And what you're trying to do at the structural note taking level is to cut out the flesh and find that skeleton. What does the outline look like for the author when they were writing this article? Okay, at the conceptual level, this is where you're trying to look for definitions or concepts. And you want to see, are they deepened? Are they broadened? Are they further refined in a way that may disagree with previous ways that these concepts were defined? That's conceptual note taking. Are there different concepts that are being connected? Syntactical note taking is that level where you're looking at the shape of the discussion and how ideas are being connected differently. You really want to make reading a habit. Consistency pays off. One of the things that you can do is you read, and when I was a graduate student, it was my Saturday morning activity. You get a cup of coffee and read for 3 hours. I absolutely loved it. You know, I classify the articles either by method, by subtopic within the communication discipline, because that's what I studied, thought pieces or conceptual pieces versus empirical articles. These are all things that you could do. Then you can state what the article is about with utmost brevity. You can number the points in relation to one another. You can think about what question or what's the point of the article, you know, what are they really asking? What's the overall goal of the author by writing this article? So that's you know, these are the different levels of note taking.
Yeah, and I want to comment here. Again, I think I mentioned it a little bit before, but those notes are the notes that you put in your own words, concisely and briefly summarizing your notes. That is a really important stepping stone to when you start to synthesize different articles in whatever you're going to be producing, be it a course paper, be it a lab report. And so it just becomes this place where you are demonstrating your understanding and comprehension of what the author is trying to say. And I just can't stress that writing it down or typing it down, however it works for you, that functions differently than just highlighting a passage.
And next, we want to think about taking it further so that we're critically thinking now about the articles, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to think about is how the author interpreting the different terms, or how are key terms being described? What are the leading propositions or claims in some of the most important sentences? In your own words, what is the author's argument? Which problems did the author solve, or which ones did the author not solve? Which ones pop out at you? And if you're really the only person who sees this, that's how you identify gaps in the literature for your own thesis or your own dissertation. So it's really fun to see, okay, let's take a step back. What are they saying? What problems did they solve? Now, what does this mean in terms of how I see the world, or when I'm just reflecting on it? What, you know, what did the author not say, right? And so that's a really great point. Do you want to
Yeah, or who did the author not include in the
Yes.
research, right? So if you're doing, you're looking at human subjects research, was this a homogeneous sample? Like, what is missing in this piece? Because each article is just a little chunk of the knowledge. And
That's
so
true.
there's always going to be those gaps and those places for further investigation. And that's where I think,
It's a lot of fun.
it's fun.
Yeah,
What can I add?
exactly. Reading aids, and you know, there always is going to be someone, in my experience, in one of my classes, who is freaking out because they didn't understand every single word in an article. And I smile because that was me at some point in my life. And you can look up words in a dictionary. You can go and try to translate them using translation device. There are encyclopedias. You can use ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, I'm going to copy and paste an article. Tell it to me in 20 words, each one with an average of 7 words, 7 characters or less. I've done that. It works. Google Gemini, you can Google stuff and find articles that are more made for a less specialized audience, But this is the thing with all these tools. These tools offer a lot of help, but they can also be an impediment. Because if you're going to really look up every single term that you don't understand, it might take you a very long time to get through the information, and they may not even be important terms after all. So be careful to do that. Students, I've had many, many students tell me, I can't understand this because English is not my first language. Well, I'll tell you something. I've also had students who English is their first language tell me they don't understand it.
That's right.
It's a new way of learning, it's a language that's new to all of us in graduate school. And we learn by reading. And, don't be afraid to use a translation device, but I'm telling you, don't get bogged down by the intense amounts of information that's available to us. Okay. So sometimes even I will have to go up to an encyclopedia and maybe figure out some background information. Maybe I'll need a book because the article is way too specialized and I feel like a fish out of water. But at the same time, if I do that for too long, then I'm not able to make progress in my own work. So just remember, it's a double-edged sword. Use it to your advantage.
Yeah, and I think if this is starting to slow you down, this is a great place where highlighting does work. Highlight the passages or highlight the words that you don't understand, and then maybe you come back to them after you finish the article. So at least you get through that reading and then that additional clarity that you might require. Because you don't want this to like bog you down.
Exactly.
The notion is to get through these articles in the most efficient way possible.
Exactly. Reading in the sciences, and this will be interesting because Susan's a sociologist and I'm a communication scholar, so we have a little bit of a different background here. So in the social sciences, what we study, I've said in a different video that methods are extremely important in social science, and we have a lot of jargon in our fields. But then in the natural sciences, there's symbols and relationships. Sometimes there are equations. It almost looks like completely different language on its own. And you might be tempted to go to, I'm always tempted to look at Psychology Today and see what the popular science is saying about a different study, but it's not an adequate replacement because it leaves out important details. Sometimes there's like some really important scientific steps that we need to understand that's only available in an article. So please review the lecture where we talk about the structure of the research article or the skeleton model to help you move forward. Really stick to the basics. A scientific article has its sections: introduction, literature review, methods, results, and discussion. Stick to that and let those sections help you go through it. Go back to the transition words, take some notes, and really try to tough it out. Try to just keep wrestling and practicing with these readings until they become second nature to you.
Yeah, and I just want to say a little note on the popular science. Like, you really do need to be careful. That's really great, like when you're like on a train or like, waiting for your dinner to kind of glance at those things. And they're not terrible. I'm not saying that in the least, but don't consider them the sources. If you're reading, you use the example of Psychology Today. If you're reading something, say, in Psychology Today that talks about cognitive behavioral therapy, try to find out where that person who's writing in Psychology Today got the original study from. And if it's something that resonates with you and it's going to expand your knowledge or help inform what you're working on, go back to the original empirical article. I do that a lot when I'm reading. I read the New York Times every day and I read the Atlantic, and they will always kind of say, according to so-and-so study. I'll then go back and try to track down so-and-so study.
Yeah, and that's another really great way to find studies. And this is where the distinction is between what you have to read and what you want to read, right? You might be in a psychology class where the teacher doesn't care about these, most up-to-date studies that appeal to you. Don't feel like you're not allowed to read it. You can really enjoy whatever you like, and really reading efficiently and learning efficiently is about figuring out what you enjoy so you can play with the ideas that excite you.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some topical reading of scientific articles. So, make sure that you're reading the right passages and materials. So if you're not reading an article from a credible journal, that could be a problem. I've actually seen this with students before where they're reading something that looked like a reputable journal. It was from a different field. It turned out it wasn't. And no amount of coaching could prevent that. If you're looking at the wrong literature, you're going to be out of place in some ways in academic spheres. So please look at the lecture and journal credibility. You can look at different professors and what they're publishing. You can look at associations and what journals are affiliated with them. You can look at some of the AI tools that I recommended. There are many different ways to do that. Then you can categorize the articles, pigeonhole them, put them in groups based on what terms do they use? How do they define these terms? Which decade did they conduct their studies? And this is a really interesting thing because in the 1970s, that's when, in at least communication, we start to see survey studies. And so it's really interesting. If you're reading from the 1940s through the 1990s or 2000s, you'll start to notice that there's a difference in the methods or the difference in the ways the articles are written. And even if you don't go back and try to read all the original articles, oftentimes when studies or theories are being described, there's like, since the seminal study on agenda setting, for example, and they'll kind of break it down and almost create stages or neat chapters for when or how a theory developed. So that's really important to think about. Ask questions that shed light on the main points of the author. How do authors define these issues? Are there pros and cons? Are there different perspectives? You really want to compare how these ideas are being developed. Order the points that the authors have made. You know, if there are that are for a perspective, others that are against it. This is really the foundation for a literature review where you're contrasting two different perspectives, posing your research question.
And this is how we move it forward, right? That Miriam may have one approach and one theoretical perspective on something. I may have something completely different, but on the same topic. And looking at that tension between the two of them, that's where then you guys are going to be in the space where you're going to be producing the next set of knowledges. And then finally, I want to, as a sociologist, right, we're about the social, don't do this stuff alone. None of us do amazing work by ourselves. So it always is kind of a community. And so one tool that I learned in graduate school was to read in groups. Because when you might read by yourself, but come together with some other people to talk about the articles, talk about the points that you felt that the author was trying to make, and your colleague or your friend may actually have pulled out something different, and have a discussion about those two perspectives, because somewhere in the middle is probably where they were going. Create and share outlines that are more concise than the full empirical article. This is going to allow your conversation to flow, but doing that kind of work to make an outline of an academic article, that is just another mechanism for you to be learning the information deeper. Include folks who are diverse, whether it be language, neurodivergence, because we all see things from our own perspectives, and we can sometimes stay stuck in that perspective. And if we're in a space where people are thinking differently, have different use of language, we're going to, again, be able to talk together and communicate, and that gives birth to kind of new understanding. And then when you explain your understanding of an article or a perspective, that actually does cement your own learning and your own knowledge. So not only are you going to be teaching others, you actually do teach yourself, and it goes a little bit differently in terms of cognition. And so together, just learn the language of science. It's a new language, right? Most of us aren't brought up like reading the peer-reviewed journal articles. And it is a different type of writing. It's a different type of presentation of information. And none of us learn this stuff in isolation. So learn this new language, this new way of thinking, and this new way of hopefully producing knowledge in partnership with other people. It can be fun.
Yeah, it is fun. Yeah, and it never ends. So yeah, definitely want to get those networks. And again, if so many different kinds of people didn't need help with this, we wouldn't have lectures like this, right? And so don't feel discouraged. Keep going.
You've got this.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thanks.